In May, Donald Trump's inaugural state visits were in the Middle East, just like they were during his first term. Stop 1, Saudi Arabia.
That's a huge coup for Riyadh and for the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Trump wanted the region's richest nations to pledge massive investments in the US.
With this trip, we're adding over $1 trillion.
$1 trillion, $600 billion. What is a mere $400 billion between friends?
Well, quite. And Gulf states aren't short of financial reserves thanks to decades awash with oil revenue. The vehicles likely making those friendly investments are sovereign wealth funds. These often opaque, misunderstood funds are closely linked to concentrated state power and strategic diplomacy.
They are increasingly invested in assets which are touching the everyday lives of people all over the world.
And in one area in particular.
You think about the feeling that you get when you watch the Olympics or something like that feeling of national pride. Sports is one of the few things that's really able to do that.
And this is all very relevant to a region that knows it can't rely on oil forever. So it's worth asking, what are Gulf sovereign wealth funds about to mean for you and the world? Sovereign wealth funds are state-owned investment firms typically established with revenue from natural resources. They're controlled by governments and, as we'll see, the money ends up in a wide range of places and industries. Looking at the top bunch worldwide, half belong to Gulf states: Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE, where Abu Dhabi's ADIA has more than $1 trillion of assets under management. Then there's China,
where there's a lot of big sovereign wealth funds and other big state-backed investors. They're the main focuses on the different national initiatives. So you're thinking like the Belt and Road.
That's China's $1 trillion global network of infrastructure developments. Things like this port in Peru, built to improve trade links with Asia. The world's biggest sovereign wealth fund, perhaps surprisingly, is Norway's.
They control around 1.7 trillion of assets.
Gulf funds are different. They're some of the most active and influential.
Last year, they actually invested $82 billion US, which stood for about 60% of the global deal making.
And collectively, they dwarf the others.
If we look across the Gulf region, that all adds up to well over $4 trillion of assets held in these funds.
This hydrocarbon-rich slurry of prehistoric plankton quite literally fueled that, thanks to decades of enterprising drilling. Back in the 1950s, it created a nice problem, to which sovereign wealth funds became a solution.
They were earning more money than they could actually spend. And so the idea was really to find a place where you could park all of this excess cash.
But over the last decade, the cost of clean energy alternatives to oil has plummeted. This is causing a less nice problem. Take Saudi Arabia, for instance, where the majority of the economy is supported by oil revenue. This green line shows the projected per barrel oil price needed for the government to balance its books from 2012 until the end of this year. This black line shows that since 2014, prices have mostly fallen below that. Something was needed to make up the difference.
Vision 2030 is this really ambitious project that MBS has to kind of transform Saudi Arabia's economy away from oil and into sort of new industries. They're thinking things like AI or e-gaming or sports or life sciences, tech.
So once again, Gulf sovereign wealth funds are part of a solution.
They're also out there making these Middle East countries a really major player on the global stage.
You think about the airlines that you fly on, the hotels that you stay in, the data centers that hold your data. These are all things that sovereign wealth funds in the Gulf are now invested in.
This is also a region that's still very misunderstood by a lot of the Western world. When Qatar was hosting the 2022 World Cup, they made that a big feature. You know, they wanted to showcase the culture that Qatar has for a Western audience and stay true to that.
Sports is one of the things that has really sort of risen up the agenda probably over the last sort of 10 to 15 years.
It's hard to put an exact figure, but certainly in the tens of billions that these sovereign wealth funds are plowing into the world of sport and entertainment.
Let's just look at some of the leading countries from earlier. By 2025, they'd collectively invested those billions across Formula One, golf, the NBA, the NHL, mixed martial arts, football, and related TV rights. And that's to say nothing of the elephant in the room. More on that later.
I mean, if you go back to 2002, actually the Libyan Investment Authority was the first sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East that invested in Juventus in Italy.
Things have kind of snowballed since then.
The Qataris own Paris Saint-Germain, Abu Dhabi owns Manchester City, the PIF of Saudi Arabia owns Newcastle United.
And they've been pretty decent when it comes to financial returns too. Here is Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain trailing only Real Madrid in one analysis of how much clubs pulled in during the 2023-2024 season.
American sports were sort of another animal that sovereign wealth funds in the Gulf would not touch. But lately, Qatar has been now quite active in sports in America. And we're talking here about very large numbers, very profitable, that move billions of dollars every year.
Money is only part of the appeal.
In a lot of cases, the soft power, the diplomacy, the more qualitative aspects versus the quantitative aspects, that ends up being far more powerful than anything that, money could really buy.
So if you suddenly discover that a country out of the Gulf that you've maybe never heard of before has come in and bought your favorite football team, suddenly you're starting to learn more about it.
They also have this added advantage of, being something that can really introduce these countries to the rest of the world.
You see branding of the likes of Emirates and Etihad and a lot of the Saudi brands appearing around Newcastle now as well.
This Middle East soft power is, of course, nothing new in and of itself.
If you look at Egypt, Turkey, even Pakistan, Jordan, they've all received significant sums of money. And one may say that it wasn't only designed to serve financial purposes.
But what's changing is its reach. Take the developments inside President Donald Trump's favorite sport.
One of the most high-profile ones of the past few years has been Saudi Arabia's push into golf through establishing Live Golf as a challenger to the PGA. Ultimately, the governor of the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia could well sit in a position on the board of golf's most important body globally.
That governor in question is Yasser Al-Rumayyan.
He's someone who is very close with President Donald Trump. The two have been photographed playing golf together many, many times.
So this has been a hugely successful part of this sports investment strategy.
Trump 2.0 and the Middle East sovereign wealth funds, I think, is going to be one of the most important stories to watch.
It'll surprise few people that this has all drawn scrutiny and criticism.
One of the kind of most current and high-profile examples is in the case of Man City. They're facing some pretty extreme accusations from the Premier League over the way that they do their financial accounting.
Accusations the club denies. The 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar triggered a cultural debate too.
The sports investments that these countries have done, has led to these claims that the governments of this region are trying to sports wash their reputation. To some extent, that is a deliberate part of the strategy.
Critics are concerned that serious issues are being managed out of collective view, such as the rights of migrant workers and members of the LGBTQ community and the environment.
The other side of the argument is that as these players are making more of these Western investments, does that kind of bring them along the spectrum towards more Western ideals?
So where do we go from here?
In the short term, it's hard to see how an investment in Newcastle or Man City is paying off. But actually, it's a long game. Hopefully, in a few years' time, we will start seeing more divestments and exits, and we'll be able to assess whether these investments have made sense financially as well.
If you look into the UAE and Abu Dhabi, they, I think, have done a pretty good job at using their sovereign wealth funds to invest in areas that will give them access to the technologies of the future, that will diversify their economies.
And that was the story we saw gaining a new chapter in May.
If you look at the various events that are going to be hosted by Saudi Arabia over the coming decade, we're going to be looking at hundreds of billions of dollars spent on the infrastructure to build stadiums.
You'll also remember this chart from earlier, where we looked at sports investments. There's one we didn't show you: esports.
PIF has invested over $20 billion in a range of companies related to gaming.
And has actually said, they're looking to spend around $40 billion by the end of the decade because they see such a huge opportunity in that arena.
Riyadh will again host the Esports World Cup in 2025, where tens of millions of dollars are up for grabs by teams competing in games including Valve's Dota 2. And you now know where this kind of money might be coming from in the future.